A 15-year-old survivor is opening up after escaping a flooded subway in China. She says dozens of people died in front of her while trapped inside, and even more remains were seen lying on the subway platform afterward. Flooded subway cars in Zhengzhou city are taken away with black cloth covering the windows. Netizens are questioning what the authorities are hiding. New evidence surrounding China's flood disasters. A video online shows Chinese authorities clashing with locals, who say the troops came to destroy local river embankments. China's Red Cross faces a serious accusation. A businessman says the organization embezzled thousands in donation funding. And American investors are rushing to divest from Chinese companies in the health sector. That's as fears rise that Beijing's crackdown on private companies will hit the medical industry next. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A 15-year-old survivor is opening up after escaping a deadly subway car incident. In a self-recorded video, she explains.
人生中第一次摸到真的死人。
That's after she and her parents got trapped inside a flooded subway train car in China's Zhengzhou city along the Metro Line 5 route last Tuesday. They were inside the last carriage, the hardest hit by floodwaters. A video circulating online shows the scene, with riders gasping for air inside the sealed subway car. The survivor says the severe lack of oxygen inside knocked out many of the passengers. She recounts.
这次事故死了很多人，死了10几个人，都是一个一个亲眼看到的。大家死亡的原因都是缺氧，严重缺氧。
Video clips show the water rose to the passengers' necks. Many of them were seen calling to their families to say goodbye. One victim was nearby the young survivor at the time. The woman called her mother, gave her the family bank card password, and passed away not long after. The survivor recalls severe pain in her chest and says she wasn't able to breathe. Her father also went into shock several times and lost consciousness. What's more, she later learned from fellow riders that authorities had announced that all trapped passengers had been safely evacuated. The news shocked her. Pointing out the irony, she witnessed the passengers around her suffocate. Yet the masses were being told they had all been rescued. Official reports released while the riders were still trapped read, "At present, the trapped passengers have been evacuated safely." The young survivor points out that after she was rescued, she saw many people lying on the train platform, noting, "I think most of them are dead." The accident's official death toll now stands at 14. Before the disaster, Chinese authorities are suspected of releasing floodwaters to lessen pressure on upstream reservoirs. That came amid heavy rainfall in central China. But the immense water flow inundated the Zhengzhou subway line. The city is home to 5 million people. As videos spread online following the subway flood disaster, one unusual clip is drawing attention. It captures survivors as they recount the horrors of being trapped inside the flooded train cars.
他们全是被淹死的，没有前面车厢的人那么幸运。
But in the video, someone seemingly tried to stop them from detailing what they went through.
我们一开始都在最后一个车厢。
那您是幸福的？
我妹妹是最后一个车厢被救出来的，我是在水淹到脖子的时候自己往前游了一个车厢活下来的。
高温了。其他的人有被水冲走的时候，你看到了吗？
被水冲走，他们全部都是第一批从前面的车门出去的人。
你们哪儿的几个呀？不是外面的。
A man there suddenly interrupted the conversation.
你们哪儿的几个呀？不是外面的。有没有外面呀？这是外面啊。前面别让摸黑。
The survivors left the scene before answering the final question. Where are the flooded subway cars in Zhengzhou? On Monday, local residents spotted at least 4 trains being dragged out and transported elsewhere. The windows were all covered with black cloth. And a day later, the subway cars were spotted on a highway. A netizen took a close-up. All the openings in the windows were covered with black cloth. Even the numbers on each door were covered. The destination, unknown. Some netizens question what are the authorities covering up and how many subway cars were submerged in water. Chinese authorities did not publish any figures. But a netizen on Chinese social media Weibo wrote one of his friends works at a local insurance company, and he told him that a total of 91 subway cars have been soaked, and his company has to pay at least $600 million in compensation. The Chinese public is outraged over the tragedies in Zhengzhou, and now some high-level CCP officials are saying do not wait for orders in a disaster. They said this when a typhoon hit China's east coast over the weekend. The governor of Zhejiang province said it's wrong to wait for orders from officials higher up in the case of an emergency. A Twitter user commented the Zhejiang governor betrayed the Henan governor. The user says this is the same as admitting that people were killed in a Zhengzhou subway because officials were waiting for their governor's order. A Zhengzhou subway insider previously said that was exactly what had happened. The person wrote everyone followed orders from supervisors and were very careful not to make any mistakes and lose their positions. From when the floodwater rushed into the subway to when it completely submerged the trains, there was plenty of room to evacuate the passengers, but they didn't do anything. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is now proposing something simple. Subways should be suspended in an emergency, depending on the situation. A Chinese netizen commented the CCP is always making a very simple and reasonable thing incredibly complicated. They even struggle to weigh the pros and cons when making a simple decision. And how are Chinese residents helping themselves amid the floods? A group of volunteers decided to deliver supplies to a flooded area in Henan province's Xinxiang. They packed their cars with food, water, chocolate, some rescue equipment, 2 inflatable boats, and began the journey. While driving on the highway, the further they went, the harder it was for them to see land. They saw all kinds of cars on their way there. Some not only carried supplies, but also had banners with encouraging words on them. Official rescue teams were rare. The rescue teams they saw were mostly from the private sector. When the volunteers finally got to their destination, they were told the water was over 3 feet deep in the village, and they couldn't get in. The rescue workers' eyes lit up when they learned that the volunteers brought them inflatable boats. To transport thousands of villagers to dry land, the rescue teams are in desperate need of these equipment. What struck the volunteers the most was the heat and the odor. They said when they first opened their car windows, the smell that hit their face almost made them faint. To better understand, they asked people to imagine blowing the odor of the sewer into a room using a hairdryer, then turning off the air conditioner and letting the temperature rise to around 90 degrees. That's how it's like in the flooded areas. China's Red Cross Society is facing a serious accusation that it doesn't want to help the flood victims in Henan province. A man tells the Epoch Times he recently donated $90,000 to the organization to help the flood victims. But the Chinese Red Cross embezzled his donation. NTD's Don Ma has more.
China's state-run Red Cross Society is embezzling flood relief donations. That's according to what the chief supervisor of a company in Henan province tells the Epoch Times. The newspaper gave him a pseudonym to protect his identity. The chief supervisor Chiu Kai recently donated over $90,000 to China's Red Cross, designated for buying relief goods and aid for Henan's flood victims.
I communicated with their manager. He told me something that made me so angry. I asked him when they will be able to forward the money. He said, I don't know, maybe next year. What do I need you for if you're going to do it next year? The manager said, there's nothing I can do at the moment. Now the money can't even be refunded.
Here's the original plan Chiu had in mind. After donating the money, the Red Cross Society would then forward the funds to stores where Chiu could personally buy flood relief goods. Normally, after someone donates to a disaster relief group, that organization will take care of purchasing the goods, but Chiu wanted to take matters into his own hands and buy them personally. But he didn't expect that China's Red Cross would pocket the money. Chiu says the Red Cross previously pledged to forward the funds after he donated them.
The Red Cross promised me that there would be no problem before I gave them the money. After I gave them the money, they do such a thing to me. I fell for it. I got scammed. I was scammed in broad daylight. This is such an immoral thing to do. I find that this government doesn't uphold its responsibilities. Then the people suffers as a result.
Chiu had a second plan, that is to directly buy the relief goods and then personally deliver them to flood victims. He bought close to $80,000 worth of goods and transported them to northern Henan's Xinxiang city. But there, he encountered another hitch. Local authorities there wouldn't accept the goods.
After we brought the goods to Xinjiang's Makino District Emergency Management Center, we talked to them for 7 hours. We wasted 7 hours in this place. We were irritated. We couldn't come to an agreement. In the end, we didn't want to donate the goods anymore. The goods didn't get accepted. Even if you find the people in charge to say you want to donate it to the government, nobody will accept it. No one will sign for it.
Chu says all he wished to do was help flood victims, but says the problem is authorities aren't doing their part. Don Ma, NTD News.
New evidence emerges surrounding China's flood disasters. Some claim Chinese authorities sent the military to destroy local river embankments designed to block floodwaters.
部队这些人承认了，他们来到这儿才知道是来炸河堤的，他们干了这些人，他们承认了来这儿炸河堤的。
Videos circulating online appear to show soldiers in Henan Province's Xinjiang city caught by locals in the middle of the night. The video comes after a local river overflowed last week. Because of water released from a reservoir upstream, the flooding has not yet receded. Water levels are still rising in the city, and more rainfall is expected in the coming days. Starting Wednesday in China, Nanjing City's funeral homes are suspending all services. A notice says cremated ashes will be temporarily stored in funeral homes and can be buried when services resume. But it didn't give a date for the reopening. As of Wednesday, the eastern Chinese city has reported more than 150 confirmed cases of the CCTV virus known as COVID-19. Deputy Director of the city's Center for Disease Control and Prevention commented on the situation Tuesday, explaining that many of the new cases were caused by the Delta variant of the virus. The new strain is more transmissible, spreads faster, and often leads to more severe symptoms. NTD cannot independently verify the city's pandemic data. That's due to Beijing's tight control over what information is released and its history of underreporting virus cases. All residents in Nanjing are now required to take a fourth round of virus testing. At the same time, authorities have shut down cinemas, gyms and fitness studios, swimming pools and bars, among other venues. Large-scale gatherings are also prohibited. A Chinese state-run media outlet interviewed a person familiar with the matter for details. They asked to remain anonymous. They say Nanjing is now under de facto lockdown and added that the source of infections in the area, Lukou Airport, was closed Monday, but not before cases started to spread. A prominent Chinese billionaire was sentenced on Tuesday to 18 years in prison. He's also known for being critical of the Chinese regime. This comes as Beijing is cracking down on private enterprises and limiting their influence. Sun Dawu is slapped with a slew of alleged crimes, including inciting people to attack state agencies, illegal fundraising, and so-called provoking trouble. Sun is the founder of Dawu Agriculture and Animal Husbandry Group. In China, it's common for authorities to lay criminal charges on those who denounce the regime. The billionaire has been critical of the regime as early as 2003. Just last year, he indirectly criticized China's economic system in an interview with foreign media. In 2019, authorities tried to cover up the African swine fever epidemic. Sun went against them and revealed to the public that tens of thousands of pigs had died on his farm. Sun also set up a hospital and ran it against the principle of state-run hospitals, which is no money, no treatment. Sun's hospital has exactly the opposite principle. It offers treatments to patients for little to no money. Some believe that Sun's hospital may be cutting profits from its state-owned counterparts. Coming up, American investors are rushing to divest from Chinese companies in the health sector. The fear is rising that Beijing's crackdown on private companies will hit the medical industry next. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
China is facing a new wave of socialism. Crackdowns in the tech and education sectors are leaving investors worried that the health sector will be next. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Investors have rushed to divest from China's health sector. They fear that Beijing's crackdown in tech and education will hit the medical industry next. Medical expenses are one of the key areas Beijing is targeting for social change. In turn, that's heightened expectation that the healthcare market will soon be reformed. China's healthcare index dropped by about 13% over the past week as selling was fierce. That trend could likely continue, as some analysts say China is facing the biggest ideological shift since then CCP leader Deng Xiaoping initiated economic reforms 40 years ago. Medical companies with tech overlap have dropped the most so far, with GenScript Biotech losing up to 36% of its value in 5 days. China's health sector is vast, comprising defense service providers, pharmaceuticals, and fast-growing tech and biotech firms. The cost of medical treatments in the country remains high, and quality of service is also an issue. That's even though it's been supported by rising public and private spending. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
President Biden tells intelligence officials that a cyber attack could cause the U.S. to go to war with another major power. He says ransomware attacks are starting to cause more damage in the real world, and U.S. intelligence agencies need to keep a watchful eye on countries like Russia and China. NTD's Colin Fredrickson has the story.
On a visit to U.S. intelligence agencies Tuesday, President Biden says a cyber attack is the most likely reason the U.S. would go to war with another major power.
If we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach.
He says ransomware attacks are causing more damage in the real world now, and their threat is growing. And he says Russia is a serious cybersecurity threat to the U.S., partly because they have a weak economy.
When I was with Mr. Putin, who has a real problem, he's sitting on top of an economy that has nuclear weapons and oil wells and nothing else.
He says that makes Putin very dangerous. Biden says the Chinese regime is another major threat. He called them a possible mortal competitor to the U.S. in the future.
He is deadly earnest about becoming the most powerful military force in the world, as well as the largest and most prominent economy in the world.
Biden says the Chinese regime has a real plan and the U.S. needs to keep pace. He says the U.S. needs to balance cooperating with Russia and the Chinese regime on some issues, while the U.S. intelligence community keeps a watchful eye on their ultimate objectives. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a special report coming up this Friday. For years, cyber attacks have been a huge headache for the U.S. and its allies. Now, for the first time, they are formally calling out one of the biggest sources in charge behind the scenes.
New this morning, the U.S. is joining with allies around the world to call out the Chinese government for a series of cyber intrusions.
This prosecution is unique. This case is about a cyber hacking and economic espionage campaign led by the government of China.
In a special report, we look at just who are these Chinese hackers, how the regime uses the attacks to achieve their strategic goals.
Unsurprisingly, the intrusions targeted industries outlined in the Made in China 2025 plan.
How Beijing is building a massive database full of details about average Americans.
We're talking about people's health histories, their criminal histories.
And what tools the U.S. has to stop it. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV this Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. China in Focus is partnering with a platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.